107 procedures. He's 5 years old.
This is Kaitlyn Rose Laura, a stay-at-home mother in Glen Rose, Texas. A woman her neighbors called devoted.
Yeah.
He's a sick child. You wouldn't understand.
Then why did he gain 4 pounds the day you left?
She is also the reason her 6-year-old son had never spent a single healthy day of his life. This is what she did to him. On April 1st, 2026, Tarrant County deputies arrived at a single-story home in Glen Rose, Texas, to arrest a 34-year-old mother named Kaitlyn Rose Laura. The charge was injury to a child by a guardian. The investigation that led to her arrest had taken 17 months. It involved 3 hospitals, 14 pediatric specialists, 2 child protection agencies, and a 6-year-old boy who had undergone more than 100 medical procedures before doctors realized he had never been sick. He had been admitted to emergency rooms 41 times. He had been fitted with a feeding tube he did not need. He had been scheduled for a surgery that would have removed part of his small intestine. And in the 72 hours after he was finally separated from his mother, he gained 4 pounds, walked unassisted for the first time in 9 months, and asked a nurse for a cheeseburger. When investigators sat down across from Kaitlyn Laura in an interview room at the sheriff's office, she said one sentence before her attorney stopped her. 8 words. We will get to those 8 words. This is what happened. To understand how a 6-year-old child ended up on an operating table for a procedure he did not need, you have to go back 5 years to the summer of 2021 and a small house on the edge of Glen Rose, Texas. Kaitlyn Rose Laura was 29 years old. By every account from neighbors, from former co-workers, from members of her church, she was the kind of mother other mothers admired. She had left a job in dental administration after the birth of her son, Ethan, to stay home with him full-time. Her social media accounts, which would later become a key part of the investigation, showed a woman who appeared to be doing everything right. Photographs of homemade meals. Photographs of Ethan in matching outfits with his mother. Long, thoughtful captions about gratitude, motherhood, and faith. What none of those photographs showed was that by the time Ethan was 18 months old, Kaitlyn had taken him to the emergency room 9 times. The first visit was for vomiting. The second was for what Kaitlyn described as a seizure that had stopped before they arrived. The third was for difficulty swallowing. Each time, Ethan was examined. Each time, doctors found nothing wrong. Each time, Kaitlyn was sent home with reassurance. And each time, within 2 weeks, she was back. By Ethan's 2nd birthday, his pediatric file at Glen Rose Medical Center was 400 pages long. By his 3rd, it had been transferred to a specialist in Fort Worth. By his 4th, it had been transferred again to a children's hospital in Dallas, because the case, in the words of one doctor's handwritten note from January of 2024, had become, quote, medically inexplicable. That note would later be subpoenaed. Kaitlyn Laura did not appear to be the kind of woman who would harm her own child. She was, in fact, the kind of woman who appeared to be saving him. She kept binders, color-coded binders, each one organized by symptom, by date, by physician, by medication. She brought them to every appointment. She knew the names of medications most pediatricians had to look up. She could recite Ethan's vital signs from a hospitalization that had occurred 2 years earlier without checking a single page. Doctors, at first, were impressed. Several of them wrote letters of recommendation when Kaitlyn applied to be a parent advocate at a local pediatric foundation. One described her as, quote, the most prepared and engaged caregiver I have encountered in 14 years of practice. That letter would also, eventually, be subpoenaed. She told friends that Ethan had been born with a gastrointestinal motility disorder. She told a different group of friends that he had a mitochondrial disease. She told her church, in a tearful prayer request video posted in March of 2023 that doctors had given him a 50% chance of living to see his 10th birthday. None of those things were true. But by the time Ethan turned 4 years old, the medical system had begun to act as if they were. He had been prescribed 11 different medications. He had been fitted with a port in his chest for intravenous nutrition. He had spent more nights in hospital beds than in his own. And he had stopped speaking in full sentences. The first person to notice that something was wrong was not a doctor. It was a nurse. Her name, for the purposes of this account, is Marisol Vance. She was a pediatric night shift nurse at Children's Medical Center Dallas. She had been a nurse for 19 years, and she had begun to keep her own notes. In April of 2024, Ethan Laura was admitted to Children's Medical Center Dallas for what his mother described as a severe gastrointestinal episode. He had been vomiting, she said, for 3 days. He could not keep food down. He had become lethargic. She had driven him 3 hours from Glen Rose because, in her words, the local hospitals didn't know what they were doing anymore. Ethan was 4 years old. He weighed 29 pounds. The average weight for a 4-year-old boy in the United States is 40 pounds. He was admitted to the gastroenterology floor. A feeding tube was placed. Blood work was drawn. An ultrasound was performed. Every test came back normal. Marisol Vance was the night nurse assigned to his room. On her first shift with Ethan, she noticed something that did not match the chart. The chart said the patient was severely nauseous and unable to tolerate oral intake. But when his mother left the room to take a phone call in the hallway, Ethan asked Marisol for crackers. She gave him 3. He ate all of them. He asked for more. When his mother returned, Marisol mentioned casually that Ethan had eaten some crackers and seemed to enjoy them. She expected the mother to be relieved. Instead, Kaitlyn Laura's face changed. Marisol would later describe it, in a sworn statement, as, quote, "the way someone looks when you tell them you've read their diary." Within an hour, Kaitlyn had requested that Marisol be reassigned. She told the charge nurse that Marisol had given her son food that he was medically unable to tolerate, and that she had vomited as a result. The chart that night was updated to reflect a vomiting episode at 11:47 p.m. Marisol had been with the patient at 11:47 p.m. There had been no vomiting episode. She was reassigned the next day, but she did not stop watching. Over the next 3 weeks, Marisol began to keep her own log, not on hospital paper. On a yellow legal pad she carried in her bag. She wrote down every time she saw Ethan eat something his chart said he could not tolerate. She wrote down every time his mother reported a symptom that Marisol had personally not witnessed. She wrote down the medications his mother brought from home in unlabeled pill bottles, which is a practice that most hospitals strictly prohibit and which the day staff had been allowing. In May of 2024, Ethan was discharged. His feeding tube was kept in place at his mother's insistence. A follow-up appointment was scheduled for 6 weeks later. He was sent home with a new prescription, his 12th, for a medication that suppressed gastric motility. The same medication, when given to a child without a motility disorder, can cause the very symptoms it is meant to treat. 3 weeks later, he was back in the emergency room. This time, his mother said, he had stopped responding to stimuli. He had been staring at the wall for nearly an hour. He had not blinked. She believed he was having an absent seizure. The neurology consult that followed found no abnormality. An EEG was performed. It was normal. An MRI was performed. It was normal. A spinal tap was performed. It was normal. Each of these procedures, performed on a 4-year-old, requires sedation. Each carries risk. Each leaves a small mark on a child's medical history that follows them for life. His mother thanked the doctors and asked when they could try the next test. Ethan had been hospitalized 11 times in 12 months. He had been seen by specialists in gastroenterology, neurology, immunology, allergy, cardiology, and metabolic disease. Each specialist, working in isolation, ran their own tests. Each specialist, in isolation, found nothing definitive. Each specialist, in isolation, ordered just one more workup to be safe. No one in the entire system was looking at the whole picture, except Marisol Vance. By August, her legal pad had 81 entries. She had begun cross-referencing them with the public version of the family's social media. She noticed that on one of the dates Kaitlyn had reported a severe seizure to the emergency room, her social media showed a video, posted that same evening, of Ethan unwrapping a birthday gift at a family party. He looked healthy. He was laughing. The post was time-stamped 2 hours after the reported seizure. It was at that point that Marisol began to consider the possibility that she was not watching a sick child. She was watching a crime in progress. She brought her notes to her supervisor. Her supervisor told her that what she was describing was a very serious accusation, that parents of medically complex children were often misunderstood, that the hospital had a strict protocol for raising concerns about a caregiver, that she should not, under any circumstances, share her observations outside of that protocol. She was given a form to fill out. She filled it out. The form went into a queue. The queue, she would later learn, took an average of 4 months to be reviewed. Ethan would be hospitalized 6 more times in those 4 months. In September of 2024, the first of those 6 hospitalizations escalated into something that could not be undone. Kaitlyn told the emergency room that Ethan had ingested a household chemical. She did not know which one. She had found him near the cleaning cabinet. He was vomiting. He was pale. He was crying. He was admitted to the pediatric intensive care unit. Charcoal was administered. His stomach was pumped. He spent 4 nights in the ICU. The toxicology screen, when it returned, showed a trace amount of a common over-the-counter medication in a dose that was unusual for a child his weight, but no household chemical of any kind, his mother was told. She nodded slowly. She said that she must have been mistaken about the chemical. She said the important thing was that he was safe now. She thanked the doctors. She posted that night, on social media, a long caption about the strength it takes to be a medical mother and the love that gets you through the hardest nights. The caption received 412 supportive comments. Marisol Vance read the caption from her car in the hospital parking lot. She closed the app. She sat in the dark for a long time. Then she did something that, by hospital policy, she was not supposed to do. She picked up her phone and she called Child Protective Services directly. The call to Child Protective Services on September 19th, 2024, was logged at 11:34 p.m. The caller identified herself as a mandatory reporter, gave her credentials, and asked for an investigator to be assigned to a possible case of medical child abuse. She gave the patient's name, the parent's name, and a list of 47 specific incidents, with dates, that she believed warranted review. The intake worker on the other end of the call had taken 900 reports that month. She entered the case into the system. She marked it Priority 3, which is the second lowest priority. She told Marisol that an investigator would be assigned within 10 business days. It would, in fact, take 7 weeks. The investigator, who was eventually assigned to the case, was named, for the purposes of this account, Diane Reyes. She had been with Child Protective Services for 11 years. She had 2 children of her own, and she would later tell a grand jury that the Laura case was the most disturbing thing she had encountered in her career, because, in her words, everything about it looked normal until you stacked it up. Diane began stacking it up in November of 2024, She requested Ethan's medical records, all of them, from every hospital. The request alone took 6 weeks to fulfill, because the records were spread across 7 institutions and amounted to over 9,000 pages. When the boxes finally arrived at her office, they filled the back of her car. She read for 3 weeks. She built a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet had columns for date, reporting parent, reported symptom, witnessed symptom, test ordered, test result, and outcome. By the end of December, the spreadsheet had 472 rows. The pattern, when she finally saw it, was unmistakable. In nearly every case, the symptoms had been reported only by the mother. They had rarely been witnessed by medical staff. In nearly every case, the tests had returned normal. In nearly every case, the mother had escalated to the next specialist, the next hospital, the next procedure. And the procedures taken together had begun to harm the child. The feeding tube, placed at age 3, had caused 2 infections that required antibiotics. The antibiotics had disrupted his gut. The disrupted gut had become a new symptom, which had been used to justify more tests. The port in his chest had been placed for a nutritional deficiency that, in retrospect, had likely been caused by the restrictive diet his mother had insisted on. The restrictive diet had been recommended by a specialist who had been told, falsely, that Ethan had failed 3 previous diet trials. He had not failed any diet trials. There had not been any diet trials. Diane Reyes had a binder of her own. It was 4 inches thick. She brought it to a meeting with her supervisor. She brought it to a meeting with the Tarrant County District Attorney's Office. She brought it to a meeting with the Chief of Pediatrics at Children's Medical Center, Dallas. She brought it to a meeting with the family's pediatrician in Glen Rose, who, when shown the consolidated record, sat down in his chair and did not speak for almost a minute. He then said, quote, "I have been treating this child for 4 years. I have never seen 90% of what is in this binder." That was the moment, Diane would later say, that the case stopped being a possibility and started being a certainty. But certainty, in a case like this, is not the same as evidence. To remove a child from a parent, the state of Texas requires either an immediate threat to the child's safety or a sustained, documented pattern of harm that no other explanation can account for. Diane and her team had the second. What they did not yet have was a way to prove the first. They did not have to wait long. Kaitlyn Laura brought Ethan to a pre-surgical consultation at Children's Medical Center, Dallas. The surgery, scheduled for the following month, was a partial small bowel resection. The surgeon would remove approximately 30 centimeters of Ethan's intestine. The procedure had been recommended by a gastroenterologist who had been told that Ethan's symptoms had failed every other intervention. It would be permanent. It would be irreversible. It would alter how Ethan's body absorbed nutrients for the rest of his life. He was 5 years old. The surgeon who would perform the operation was a man in his early 60s. He had performed this surgery hundreds of times. He was, by reputation, conservative. He did not believe in operating unless there was no other option. And he had, on the day of the consultation, just received a phone call from Diane Reyes. He listened to her for 38 minutes. When Kaitlyn Laura arrived at the consultation that afternoon, with her color-coded binders and her son in a wheelchair he did not need, the surgeon did something that, in 19 years of practice, he had never done before. He canceled the surgery on the spot. He told Kaitlyn that he wanted to admit Ethan for a 7-day observational stay. He told her that during those 7 days, Ethan would be cared for by hospital staff only. No outside food, no outside medications, no visitors except for supervised hour-long visits with his mother in a common area. Kaitlyn's face, again, changed. She told the surgeon that this was not acceptable. She told him that Ethan would deteriorate without her. She told him that she would be removing her son from his care immediately and seeking a second opinion at another hospital. She stood up. She reached for the wheelchair. The surgeon did not move. He told her, calmly, that a hospital social worker was already on her way to the consultation room. He told her that an emergency protective order had been filed that morning. He told her that Ethan would be staying. It took 6 minutes for Kaitlyn Laura to be escorted out of the building. It took 72 hours for the staff to begin to understand what they were looking at. In those 72 hours, Ethan ate every meal that was placed in front of him. He drank water without difficulty. He walked on his own from his bed to the bathroom on the second day. By the third day, he was asking the nurses if he could go to the playroom. By the fourth day, he had gained 4 pounds. On the fifth day, a social worker sat with him in the playroom and asked him, gently, what kinds of foods he liked. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he asked her, in a small voice, if he was allowed to like food. He said his mommy had told him that food was dangerous. He said he was not supposed to want it. The social worker did not ask any more questions that day. By the end of the 7 days, the medical team had collectively reached a conclusion. Ethan Laura was not and had never been a sick child. He was a child who had been made to appear sick. The signs of harm were not from any disease. They were from years of unnecessary medical intervention layered on top of a fundamentally healthy body. The case was referred to the Tarrant County District Attorney's Office on February 22, 2025. It would take 14 more months to build the indictment. During those 14 months, Ethan was placed in temporary foster care with a family that had been specifically trained to care for children recovering from medical abuse. He saw a therapist twice a week. He was taken off all 11 of his medications, one at a time, under medical supervision. None of the medications, when withdrawn, produced any of the symptoms his mother had reported. He grew 4 inches. He gained 11 pounds. He started kindergarten. His teacher would later say, in a victim impact statement, that within 3 months he had gone from a child who would not speak above a whisper to a child who raised his hand in class. His mother, during those 14 months, was permitted supervised visits twice a month. She used most of those visits to ask Ethan how he was feeling. She would ask him repeatedly if his stomach hurt, if his head hurt, if he was tired, if the foster family was feeding him things that were making him sick. The supervising social worker eventually began to write down the questions verbatim. Those notes, too, would become evidence. A grand jury was convened. The prosecutor presented testimony from 41 witnesses over the course of 3 weeks. Diane Reyes testified for 2 days. Marisol Vance testified for 1. The surgeon testified for half a day. The chief of pediatrics testified that the case had prompted a complete overhaul of how Children's Medical Center Dallas handled cross-specialty pediatric files. The grand jury returned an indictment on March 18, 2026. The arrest warrant was issued the following week. On the morning of April 1, 2026, 2 unmarked vehicles pulled into the gravel driveway of a single-story brick house on the outskirts of Glen Rose, Texas. The house belonged to Kaitlyn Rose Laura. The deputies who exited the vehicles were from the Tarrant County Sheriff's Office. They were accompanied by a detective from the Special Victims Unit and a supervisor from Child Protective Services. It was 7:42 a.m. The body cam footage of what happened next would, by court order, be sealed for several weeks. What can be reconstructed comes from the affidavit, the deputies' written reports, and statements that have since become part of the public record. Kaitlyn Laura answered the door in a long gray cardigan. Her hair was pulled back. She was holding a coffee mug. She looked, the lead deputy would later write, like someone who had been expecting this for a long time and had decided, in advance, exactly what face she was going to make. The deputy informed her that there was a warrant for her arrest. He read the charge. He read her rights. He asked her if she understood them. She said yes. She asked if she could put on her shoes. She asked if she could call her attorney. She asked if she could feed her cat. The deputy said yes to all three. She did not ask about her son. That detail is in the report. She was placed in handcuffs in her own kitchen. She did not resist. She did not cry. She did not, at any point during the arrest, ask where Ethan was, how he was doing, or whether he would be told what was happening. The deputy who walked her to the patrol car would later testify in a pre-trial hearing that in 23 years of arresting parents, he had never seen one not ask about their child. She was driven to the Tarrant County Sheriff's Office. She was processed. She was placed in an interview room. The room was small, painted a pale institutional gray, with a metal table bolted to the floor and 3 chairs. A camera in the corner recorded everything. The detective who entered the room was the same one who had been at the house. His name, for the purposes of this account, is Detective Marcus Halpern. He had spent 14 months on the case. He had read every page of the medical record. He had interviewed every doctor. He had watched every minute of the supervised visit footage. He knew, by the time he sat down across from Kaitlyn Laura, more about her son's life than she did. He placed a folder on the table. He did not open it. He told her, in a measured voice, that she had the right to remain silent, and that her attorney was on his way, and that anything she said before her attorney arrived could be used against her in court. He asked her if she understood. She said yes. He asked her if she wanted to wait for her attorney before answering any questions. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the folder on the table. Then she looked back at him. Her face, the detective would later say, did not change in any visible way, but something behind the eyes did. And then she said it. 8 words. I only ever wanted what was best for him. That was the sentence. That was the only sentence. Her attorney arrived 11 minutes later and instructed her to say nothing further. She did not. She has not, in any public forum, said anything further to this day. But for the prosecution, those 8 words were enough. Because in those 8 words was the entire architecture of the case. In those 8 words was the central belief that had organized 17 years of escalating medical intervention. In those 8 words was the reason Ethan Laura had been fitted with a feeding tube he did not need, prescribed 11 medications he did not need, scheduled for a surgery that would have permanently altered his body, and taught, before the age of 5, that food was dangerous and that wanting it was wrong. She had not said she was sorry. She had not said she was confused. She had not asked how her son was. She had said, instead, that she had wanted what was best for him. She had, in her own mind, never stopped being his mother. That, the prosecutor would later argue, was the most dangerous thing about her. The trial was scheduled for September of 2026, but the case never reached a jury. On the recommendation of her attorney, and after reviewing the consolidated medical record her own legal team had assembled, Kaitlyn Rose Laura agreed to a plea. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of injury to a child by a guardian, a first-degree felony in the state of Texas. She pleaded no contest to 4 counts of recklessly causing serious bodily injury to a child. The remaining charges, including those related to insurance fraud for the medical procedures billed under false pretenses, were taken into consideration during sentencing. At her sentencing hearing, the courtroom was full. The judge had set aside an entire afternoon for victim impact statements. 5 doctors spoke. 3 nurses spoke, including Marisol Vance, who read from a single sheet of paper and did not look up from it. Diane Reyes spoke. Ethan's foster mother spoke. Ethan's kindergarten teacher spoke. Ethan did not speak. He was 6 years old. The judge had ruled, at the request of his therapist, that he would not be required to be present. But a letter from Ethan was read aloud by the prosecutor with his foster family's permission. It was 3 sentences long. It said that he was happy now. It said that he liked his new school. It said that he hoped, one day, that his mommy would be happy too, but that he did not want to live with her anymore. Kaitlyn Laura was sentenced to 35 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. She was ordered to have no contact with her son until he reached the age of 18, and only then if he initiated it. She was ordered to pay restitution to the 3 hospitals involved, in an amount exceeding $1.4 million. She was permanently barred from working in any setting involving the care of minors, including any volunteer capacity. She was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs at 4:17 p.m. Ethan Laura is now in the permanent custody of his foster family, who have begun the process of adoption. He is in the 2nd grade. His pediatrician describes him as, quote, a typical, healthy, energetic child with no ongoing medical needs of any kind. He has not been to an emergency room since the day his mother was arrested. Marisol Vance still works at Children's Medical Center Dallas. After the case, she was promoted to a newly created position, Pediatric Advocacy Coordinator. Her job is to receive and triage exactly the kind of report she once filed, on a yellow legal pad, in the dark, alone. She has, in the 7 months she has held the position, flagged 4 other cases. 3 of them have led to investigations. Diane Reyes still works for Child Protective Services. She testifies, when asked, at training seminars for new investigators. She tells them the same thing every time. She tells them that the most dangerous abusers are not the ones who hide. They are the ones who perform. They are the ones who arrive with binders and gratitude and faith and exhausted smiles. They are the ones the system is built to admire. The chief of pediatrics at Children's Medical Center Dallas instituted a new protocol 6 months after the arrest. Any child who has been seen by more than 3 specialists in a 12-month period without a confirmed diagnosis is now flagged for a multidisciplinary case review. The protocol is named, internally, after Ethan. The doctors do not refer to it by his name. They refer to it by the case number on his original file. That number is now framed on the wall outside the chief's office. The case exposed something the medical system had spent decades not wanting to look at. It exposed how easily a parent in a position of total trust could exploit a system designed, at every level, to assume that parental love was the same thing as parental honesty. It exposed how a child can be slowly harmed by the very institutions built to protect him, when no one is allowed to look at the whole picture, and when the person reporting the symptoms is the same person causing them. Ethan Laura turned 7 last month. His foster mother sent a single photograph to the prosecutor with permission to share it with the medical and investigative teams who had worked the case. In the photograph, Ethan is sitting at a kitchen table. He is holding a cheeseburger in both hands. He is smiling at the camera with food in his mouth, the way children do when no one has ever told them not to. It is the only photograph of him in his entire 7 years of life that does not include a hospital wristband. He is, by every available measure, going to be okay. His mother, by every available measure, will not. And the 8 words she said on the morning of April 1st, 2026, in a small gray room in Tarrant County, Texas, remain on the record. She said she had only ever wanted what was best for him. She has never, on any record, in any forum, said that she is sorry.